You're now live. Have a great meeting.
Hi, welcome. All right. So my name is Renee Mazurek, and I'm going to kick this off for us tonight. And I just want to give a thank you to everybody who's in attendance. A thank you to the Office of Sustainability for their support and contributions to this session tonight. Thank you to fellow Sustainable Advisory Committee on Energy and Environment, which we refer to as SACE, and that's how I'll be referring to it from now on. I would also like to thank the presenters that you see on your screen who will be contributing to tonight's session. So I'd like to ask Kira to pull up the presentation and we'll go from there. Thanks, Kira. So like I said, my name is Renee and I'm a member of SACE. I, along with fellow SACE members Ann Keller, who is our vice chair, and Jeffrey Hebron, have worked with the Office of Sustainability to put this public input session together. So this is SACE's public input session on the city's climate emergency and climate justice initiative. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the City of Asheville's website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 8354. I can give that number again. It's 855-925-2801 and the code is 8354. We are also broadcasting live on the city's YouTube channel. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to reflect upon and acknowledge that here in Buncombe County and the city of Asheville, we are all living, working, and recreating on land traditionally belonging to the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians. I also want to acknowledge and recognize that the format for this meeting is not as we had originally planned or envisioned it. We wanted to have it during Earth Week in person, and as you all know, in March, things halted. So we waited for a while through the uncertainty, and we ultimately decided on this virtual format to have this important conversation and receive input from the public. The need for this, as we well know, is because of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Each of us in our own homes, in our own spaces and communities are dealing with the pandemic in very different ways. But we know that it is the most vulnerable among us that are affected the most by the pandemic. And let's go to the next slide, please, Kira. Thank you. As with COVID-19, the same with climate change. The most vulnerable, most underserved communities, often Black, Indigenous, people of color, are disproportionately affected by environmental harms. So we're here tonight to be a part of the process to seek input from city planning in response to the climate emergency with an eye particularly on equity. This is not alone a sustainability issue or an environmental issue. To address the climate crisis, we must also consider intersectional topics like energy, urban tree canopy cover, transit, and housing, and how these actions in each of these topic areas will affect our community, trying to ensure that they affect our community in a just way. These are the topics that we've framed our meeting around tonight, and we'll hear from experts about each one. You'll also be able to engage and answer some polling questions during this meeting. This meeting is not the only effort on this front. And you'll hear more from Amber Weaver in the Office of Sustainability shortly about what else the city is doing for the Climate Justice Initiative. This is the only session that will be hosted by Stacy as directed by the Climate Emergency Resolution. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jeffrey, who will review the resolution, some expected climate impacts in our city, and some pertinent background information. And Kira, I think you could go to the next slide. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Great. Thank you very much, Renee. Good evening, everybody. I am Jeffrey Hebron, and as Renee mentioned, I'm a member of the SACE committee and live in West Asheville. So I wanted to give some background information. So today's focus actually builds upon efforts to integrate the city's comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2018, actually, that has 5 broad themes. And those themes include harmony with the natural environment, a livable built environment, resilient economy, healthy community, and interwoven equity. The comprehensive plan also includes reference to the city's climate resilience assessment, which identified the city's main threats and vulnerabilities to climate change. These are things that we can expect that might get worse over time, such as wildfire, landslides, extreme heat, water shortages, and flooding. And as we know, earlier this year, the city adopted a climate emergency resolution that calls on the city to develop a climate justice plan to enact actions to reduce both the city's contribution to climate change in a way that also ensures an inclusive and equitable public input process. While we do know that climate change can have a disproportionate impact on vulnerable and marginalized racial and ethnic groups, unfortunately, we also know that solutions to climate change and improving preparations to adjust to climate conditions can also replicate the existing social injustice and racial inequalities that already exist. We don't want to improve a house's ability to withstand flooding under climate change if those protection efforts disproportionately distribute the costs on certain racial and ethnic groups, or that only benefit other racial groups. Therefore, the city has developed a climate justice initiative, and our sustainability director, Amber Weaver, will explain more about it.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak a bit about what's happening in the Office of Sustainability. As Jeffrey mentioned, the Climate Emergency Resolution was passed earlier this year, and staff began to check in with other sustainability offices across the nation and better understanding some of the work that has been done, checking in on ways that they would change what they have done. We were able, and so our next step afterwards was to hire a consultant to help us with these initiatives. We wanted to be able to hire a local consultant that we felt could really get into communities that don't always share space with meetings that the city hosts. So we were able to secure Marisol Jimenez of Tapiac Consulting. She is a woman-owned business and as well identifies as a BIPOC community member of Asheville. And just what we, as a reminder, the objective of the project that we put together was the very first step is to define climate equity with the city's Black, Indigenous people of color, frontline community members, those most directly affected by climate change impacts, identified in the climate resilience assessment, those climate threats that Jeffrey identified in the previous slide. In collaboration with the city's IT department, the office is also, and the project team, in the process of developing a story map that highlights the city's climate threats in the context of other community stressors such as energy, burden, census tract data, redlining, to assist in better understanding and the direction that we need to move in, next steps for the Climate Justice Initiative. Here you can see a snapshot of the hotspots that have been identified through the work of IT and the stressors that I just mentioned, and also kind of walking through steps that Medisol, her consulting company, is doing to help us define climate equity. Next slide, please, Kira. Thank you. As I had mentioned, the office is a part of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, or I had mentioned being able to speak to sustainability offices across the nation, and we do this through our Directors Network. The Urban Sustainability Directors Network had a grant opportunity that we thought would complement this work quite well. And we were awarded the grant just recently and was on City Council's agenda the beginning of October and was passed. But through these funds, the city's able to learn from the energy and cooperation, the productivity of Asheville's Black, Indigenous, people of color to guide climate equity planning, to shape the direction of the city's emerging climate justice initiative. Grant funds are going to be used to help compensate for interviews and participation and expertise as BIPOC community members of the city of Asheville. Pretty excited. All of staff and Medisol and many of the folks that we have been working with on the team are excited to see what this engagement looks like. We're especially excited about the photo voice, which is asking young BIPOC community members to be taking photos of their interpretation of climate equity and climate resiliency. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm going to pass this next slide over to Kira.
I think we're going to practice here in a minute providing input to the polling questions. What we have, as Renee mentioned, is 4 speakers, 4 experts to talk about housing, trees, energy, and transportation. And after each one of their presentations, about 10 minutes or so, we will have an opportunity to answer questions so that we can get input that we need to continue working on this whole topic as a city. So I think Kira is going to lead us through a practice session, a few demographic questions that will help us to understand who's in the audience. Kira?
Great. Thank you, Anne. Okay, everybody, get your cell phones. We are going to practice doing a little text polling. So if you can, I'm going to change the screen that I'm sharing. If you can get your cell phone and text K, as in kangaroo, 320 to 73224. And that should be showing on the screen right now. Again, text the letter K, numerals 320 to the number 73224. You're going to receive the first of 5 demographics questions. Please complete these so we have a sense of who's in the virtual room. After the first 5 questions, please pause. You will see more questions coming on your screen. We're asking you to pause and wait until after each presentation, that's a part of the session this evening, to continue answering topical survey questions. We'll be answering subsequent questions following each of the 4 presentations. So you'll get 5 demographics questions, and I'll be refreshing some of those in live time so we can get a sense of who's in the room. And then I'm going to ask you to pause after those 5 questions when you start seeing energy questions pop up. couple more minutes here. Okay, I think that I will turn it back over to Renee to introduce our first speaker.
Thanks, Kira. And you can go to the next slide there. So for the topic of energy actions, we have Sophie, and we're grateful to have Sophie here with us tonight. Sophie Mullinex is the manager of the Blue Horizons Project. She has lived in Asheville off and on since 2001, when she moved here with her family from New York City. After 9 years in Washington, D.C., working in nonprofit management and energy efficiency programming, the Blue Horizons Project called her home to work on clean energy and energy efficiency in the mountains where she grew up. Sophie lives in Asheville with her husband, Jarek Wilson, a high school teacher, and their 2-year-old daughter. Thanks for being here, Sophie. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here to talk about energy in our community with everyone. So as Renee said, I am the manager of the Blue Horizons Project. And next slide, please. The Blue Horizons Project is a community campaign, and it works to connect everyone in Buncombe County and our community with programs and resources that help us be more energy efficient and also ease the adoption of renewable energy. Our community is more resilient and our environment is cleaner and healthier when everyone has a safe, energy efficient place to work and live in. Next slide, please. When we're talking about energy efficiency and reducing the energy we use, it's important to know how we use our energy. So this is a graph of how the average Southeast home uses energy. The lion's share of the energy we use goes to heating our spaces. Oftentimes folks think that their TV or their computer or washing machine might use the most energy, but we can see that this is not true. Nearly a third of the energy we all use goes to heating our space. Next slide, please. So we all know Asheville is unique in many ways. Our mountains, our beauty, our natural beauty, the arts and food scene here, our engaged community members. And another way that we're unique in the Southeast is that we experience our spike in energy demand called peak demand on the coldest winter mornings. Most areas in the Southeast, such as Atlanta or Charleston or Charlotte, in the southern region, they have their peak energy demand on the hottest summer afternoons when AC is cranking. But our climate here in the mountains, combined with our dominant heating sources, which is primarily electric heat, including strip heat and electric water heaters, contributes heavily to spikes in energy demand on very cold winter mornings. Think of a cold January weekday morning when families are up early getting ready for school and work. We're all warming up our homes, taking hot showers within a very short, compressed time period, when it's the coldest outside and our heaters are working the hardest, pulling the most energy from the electric grid. The same goes for businesses like schools and office buildings and factories that are warming up to start their day. Our grid must be able to access enough electricity to sustain and provide for these peaks or spikes in demand. And it's important to note that utilities, and our utility is Duke Energy Progress, are mandated by the North Carolina Utilities Commission to provide enough energy needed to more than cover that highest anticipated demand. So the focus on peak demand is there for a reason, because if we can reduce peak demand, we reduce the overall energy use or energy needed to be generated at the power plant that supplies our energy. Next slide, please. So this graph, it's a little complicated and I hope you can see it, but electricity usage for residents in our area is reflected in the blue line in the bottom third of this graph. And as you can see, and as is typical, electricity usage in our homes is much more varied with larger spikes in usage at certain times as compared to commercial and industrial usage, which tends to be more flat across the board. This means that residential energy use is a big driver of peak demand in the winter. Again, think back to those individuals, families, businesses, all getting warmed up to start their day on cold, early winter mornings. Next slide, please. So when we're thinking about addressing our energy here in town and in our community, there are challenges, of course, with any effort to change something. So we know that our city and county have both adopted 100% renewable energy resolutions by 2030 for municipal operations and by 2042 for our wider community. The problem is, right now, we don't currently have the power to control how our energy is generated unless you happen to be lucky enough to live off-grid. Our electricity is generated primarily by burning the non-renewable fossil fuel, natural gas, and this happens at the Duke Energy Lake Julian plant near Arden. And while we work to advocate for a cleaner energy mix with an increasing amount of renewable energy, there are things that we can all do to use less energy and reduce peak demand. So the more we do to reduce our peak demand and the energy we use, the less non-renewable natural gas is burned. Next slide, please. For your home, Duke Energy has a program called Energy Wise Home, and this program specifically addresses peak demand. It will put a smart device on your water heater, your electric heat pump with heat strips, and your air conditioning if you choose. And what it does is cycles off your equipment during peak demand. It doesn't turn it off completely, but it'll cycle it on and off. I have had this in my home since I moved in several years ago, and then my dad, who's lived in West Asheville since 2001, has had this since 2001 and has never noticed a decrease in his comfort in the temperature in his home. So this is a free program, and it actually gives you a bill incentive if you participate, because it helps manage peak demand in our region and helps Duke Energy sort of modulate the energy being pushed out on the grid at any given time and makes it more predictable, because peak demand spikes can be really unpredictable and hard for utilities to manage. Next, you can get a free in-home energy assessment. You can discover how energy efficient your home is or isn't through Duke Home Energy House Call. Right now, I believe this program may be paused or it may be virtual, but traditionally in non-pandemic times, someone will come to your home from Lime Energy, their contractor, and they will walk through your home, take a look at your insulation, check out how air sealed your space is, and provide you with some advice on what could be done to make your home more energy efficient, as well as information about any rebates that are available to help you achieve that, such as an air sealing rebate or an attic insulation rebate. And they'll also leave you with a free home energy saving kit, which will include some LED light bulbs, some water saving fixtures, free shower head, weather stripping, and more. And so while there are many low cost things we can all do to lower our energy use, some can cost a lot of money. And we know this. So Energy Savers Network, which is a program of the Blue Horizons Project, can help those who need the most help with lower their energy bills and live more comfortably. So this program does weatherize several hundred homes per year for free in Buncombe County that are income qualified. And then there are also changes that we can all make in our home to reduce our energy use that are behavioral. You can reduce or raise the thermostat depending on the season. You can air seal and increase insulation, reduce your hot water use cold water for laundry and hang dry, lower your water heater temperature. When you're replacing appliances, choose an Energy Star or energy efficient appliance if at all possible. And we have lots more tips and information about these programs and more on the Blue Horizons Project website. Next slide, please. So similarly for your business, there are a few programs run by Duke Energy and local partners that can provide incentives to make your business more energy efficient. The first one is called Small Business Energy Saver through Duke Energy, and this program provides really big rebates for energy efficiency improvements to businesses. Up to 80% of costs are covered. So say XYZ Factory is replacing all of their lighting with LED lighting. On average, up to 80% of costs are covered, but on average, 60% of project costs are covered. So this is free money. And I should mention that all of these programs are funded by ratepayers. We are all, by paying our Duke Energy bill, funding these programs. So if we're not using them, we're leaving money on the table. The next one is Join Duke Energy's Energy Wise business program. And this is another program that addresses peak demand, but for businesses. And it's a little bit different than the home program, but it's another important program to participate in to reduce peak demand. And then lastly, for businesses, LIDI Regional Waste Reduction Partners can help organizations improve their environmental and energy management through efficiency techniques that can save money. So this is a team of retired engineers who will do free on-site assessments through the end of 2020 and possibly into 2021, depending on funding. And they'll provide free consulting services to businesses and help you make decisions about how to reduce your energy use and what modifications or upgrades might be the most cost-effective for you. Next slide, please. The Blue Horizons Community Council is the next iteration of the Energy Innovation Task Force. And this community council is housed and will be managed by the Greenbelt Alliance, which also houses the Blue Horizons project. Meetings will follow open meeting law. Subcommittees will be formed. Everything will be open to the public, just like this meeting is. And we hope to see a lot of participation. Our first meeting is going to be later this month. On November 19th at 3:00 p.m. And you can check our website in the coming weeks to find out more details about that meeting, logistics-wise. And the purpose of the Community Council is to address the current climate crisis by leading the community in achieving its community-wide renewable energy goal of transitioning to 100% renewable energy by 2042. Through community engagement and collaboration with Buncombe County, the City of Asheville, and Duke Energy. And the council members currently being seated have areas of expertise in energy, representation from the city and county, as well as Duke Energy and local institutions and businesses. And this council will advise the work of the Blue Horizons project and form working groups or subcommittees to address the current climate crisis and work towards the goals taken on by the Blue Horizons project. That said, if you happen to know a Black Indigenous person of color or are one yourself and are interested in lending your time and resources to this council, please contact me, as that is a missing currently at this table so far. And we want to make sure to include them. Next slide, please. Lastly, I just want to talk about how energy and environmental issues are interwoven with issues of equity. You can't talk about energy or environmental issues without acknowledging that there are longstanding and deep inequities in who has historically benefited and not benefited from energy efficiency and renewable energy. We know that our low-income neighbors and our Black, Indigenous, people of color neighbors have less overall access to resources that enable an energy-efficient home or business or to install solar energy on their property. We are very mindful of these inequities and the work we are doing in partnership with the City of Asheville and Buncombe County, and we will take measurable action to address them in the journey to 100% renewable energy for us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. And we are going to ask you to go back to your phones for just a moment here. And hopefully you're already receiving the energy questions after you have answered those demographic questions. But if you have not, please text K320 to 73224. And you will get 4 questions related to some of your ideas and input on energy. We'll pause while you answer those questions and show some results from the first. Just another minute here while we wait for a few more responses to come in. Okay, if you're still working on your responses, carry on through the 4 energy-related questions, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jeffrey.
Good evening. Thank you. Our next topic is going to be transportation. And so we have the wonderful opportunity to hear from our transit planning manager in the transportation department, Eunice Lovey. She has more than 25 years of experience working in the transit industry. Eunice graduated from the University of Oregon with graduate degrees in urban and regional planning, as well as public affairs, along with a bachelor's degree in communications. And just because I got my degree at Oregon State, I will hold nothing against Eunice. So hopefully she'll have some wonderful things to share with us.
Eunice, are you on mute? Kira, do you think we should go to the next speaker and come back, or just do you know what's going on at all?
I'm not sure. It looks like Eunice is unmuted and that her internet is working. I see her moving around. Let's give it a second to see.
Looks like an unstable connection, and she's probably calling somebody who I can tell.
Why don't we go ahead and have Jeff start and come back to Eunice? Does that sound good?
Sure.
Okay, you can go ahead. You can skip through all that, and I'll start introducing Jeff. Are you ready, Jeff?
Yes, Ann, go right ahead.
Okay, hang on just a sec. I'll introduce you. Jeff Staudinger is recognized as a leading proponent of local affordable housing finance policy and strategy. He's been a community development practitioner since he began his work as a VISTA volunteer way back in the day. I won't even tell you when. And he's worked in a variety of diverse settings, starting in Vermont. He became the Asheville Community Development Director in 2009 and was promoted to Assistant Director of the Community and Economic Development Department in 2015. Jeff's work with the city focused on affordable housing policy development and funding. He served as the president of North Carolina Community Development Association. He was recognized by the North Carolina Housing Coalition as Affordable Housing Professional of the Year in 2016. And he retired from the city in 2017. Now he offers community development consulting to local governments, nonprofits, and housing developers. Jeff, we're looking forward to hearing your perspective on housing equity and climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. I'm happy to be here. As soon as the slides get started, we'll get rolling. And so tonight I'll be just doing a brief presentation about key issues and approaches on how to address the issues of housing and climate change in the city of Asheville. Next slide, please. Thanks to friends in Decatur, Georgia, I have this slide, which I think does a good job of encapsulating the relationship between equity and racial justice, climate change, for the individual issues that we're talking about tonight. It's important that we recognize that when we're framing these discussions, we're framing them around the issues of equity and racial justice, and we're framing them around the issues of climate change, not in the other direction. And that's important when we think about how we create policy, regulation, and funding to deal with the issues that we have in our communities all over the United States, not just in Asheville. Next slide, please. So the key issues I'm going to discuss tonight will be these four. We'll be looking at the probability of population increase versus the supply of housing in the city of Asheville. So the question is, who will live in Asheville? We'll be assessing life's needs. Where will these people live? We'll be talking about the built and natural environments, talking about building construction and building design. And then we'll be talking about how do the city and our other philanthropic, corporate, governmental, and individual structures provide support for equitable development. Next slide, please. So we first look at the issue of population increase versus supply. I think it's probably evident from all the news that's been happening and in our newspapers and through our media, that the people moving to Asheville who have the opportunity to do so and are moving because of climate change at this time are primarily quite affluent. And it is that influx of affluence, which is not new to Asheville, but is increasing substantially, even out to Haywood and Madison counties, where realtors report that their phones are ringing off the hook from people located in urban areas that want to move to a safer place. The average cost of the homes for sale has accelerated dramatically over the past 9 months. So the key issue that we need to address here is the approach of density. Although this seems counterintuitive in a time of pandemic, nonetheless, it is how we'll be able to preserve and redevelop our existing housing, get mixed use so that access to goods, services, schools, et cetera, is available for people, give greater access to multimodal transportation, make it affordable to provide, and know that there are challenges in this. Not quite ready for that next slide yet. No problem. And these include labor and material supply to support increased housing production and housing construction. It's constantly getting more expensive and less available. And density and growth creates a great demand on physical and service infrastructure. Next slide, please. When we assess then what this would look like, we think about how do we assess life's needs? How do people get what they need? And if density is combined with locational efficiency is a term that's used to describe how much energy do people have to expend in order to get the basic things that they need in life. We shorthand that by saying work, school, shopping, and services. And you can think of everything from medical services to how do I get to work to how do my kids get to school. The key approach of locational efficiency provides us an opportunity to create inclusionary neighborhoods and communities. Universal internet accessibility is also a key element of making that possible. The challenges in our community is that, as you well know, by many, many definitions of gentrification, Asheville is rapidly gentrifying. Our neighborhoods are changing. The racial character of our neighborhoods is changing, particularly in our historically African-American neighborhoods. And our public policies protect the privilege of those with affluence. It's a straight line connection. And when that is combined with the high cost, it creates very significant challenges to increasing housing supply in those places that have the best locational efficiency in our community. Next slide, please. Now, if we move to design and construction, we can think about the big picture in terms of design. We can preserve our existing neighborhoods with missing middle development. For those who aren't familiar with that term, it's basically saying that where we've gone as a society and as a culture is that we build single-family houses on relatively large lots, and we build multifamily developments with a relatively large number of units. And what we've forgotten is that the historic makeup of our neighborhoods has always been, particularly urban neighborhoods, of smaller sized structures that house more people. Fourplexes, for example, cottage court developments. We can achieve density without having to develop new high-rise developments. We also need to look at the opportunity for mixed income rentals with long-term dedicated affordable housing elements. This is residential rentals. We can look at new models, which I personally believe are very, very important to stability and ownership in our communities. The Community Land Trust that's just started, the Asheville-Buncombe Community Land Trust, a key change in our potential way of really making affordability place-based, cooperative home ownership. And in new communities, we can look at residential-owned manufactured home communities where that kind of development can provide an entree to home ownership. The challenges, of course, is that financial restrictions impede these innovations. The Consumer Cooperative Bank, for example, funded thousands of cooperative units in the 70s that are now, because it's not in existence, reverting to high-priced apartment and cooperative home ownership in communities throughout the country. We've codified housing type separation, which makes missing middle more difficult to produce. And NIMBY attitudes, none of my backyard attitudes, are embedded in public policy and private finance. Next slide, please. When we take it down to the actual building design and construction, we have developed a better understanding of resiliency in building techniques. We know what is more efficient than other kinds of building techniques. Very, very interesting innovations in panels that are built elsewhere and moved to locations where construction is going on that are very, very cost effective and energy efficient. We can incorporate life cycle costs into finance decisions. So if it costs less for a family to heat their home, perhaps we can incorporate that saving into the cost of the house that they can afford. We need to have less reliance on fuel-consuming technologies, and that's what our alternative energy movement is creating for us. We need to support retrofits to preserve existing housing, and as will be talked about later this evening, we need to understand and incorporate natural environments. Next slide, please. How does the city of Asheville and the other institutions I mentioned earlier support equitable development? Let's start on the regulatory side, and I have a couple very specific and, by the way, non-totally inclusive ideas. There are many, many, many ideas that are out there that are being discussed at all levels of government and committee work, particularly the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee within the city of Asheville, which is a counterpart to SACE. But we can talk about eliminating single-family housing only. Single-family zoning is probably one of the greatest vestiges of a non-equitable development pattern in our communities. We can reduce required parking as we become less reliant on individual automobiles and become more energy efficient in our location. We can support shared residences and boarding houses. And very, very important, and difficult to do in North Carolina, but we can really move towards requiring truly affordable housing as a part of every new development or redevelopment. There are many, not going to agree with this. There are many other public policies that can support equitable development and equitable affordable housing that others will talk about and have talked about tonight, and are very important elements of inclusive and diverse neighborhoods and affordable neighborhoods. Next slide. And finally, we can talk about how do you fund this, because frankly, housing production, whether it's in retrofit or new housing, is, if anybody has tried to build or buy a house recently, or has looked for a new apartment, or has looked to change their living situation, they know it's not cheap. Housing Trust Fund. The City of Asheville has a housing trust fund. It's a very innovative method of providing direct local financial support to meet many of these goals. Has a land use incentive grant, which provides a tax rebate. It's not a tax rebate legally, but it acts as a grant that acts as a tax rebate for those that are meeting specific city goals. And in fact, some of the things we're talking about tonight are already incorporated into the city's land use incentive grant to determine the size of a grant someone receives in the, which takes the form of essentially repaying taxes to them. General obligation grant funds, general obligation bond funds. The city is using 25 million of general obligation bond funds right now, supporting a variety of new affordable housing in our community. And the same way, special districts can be established where bonds could be approved to support development specifically within those areas. There are many other funding sources available at the federal, state, and private levels. And I will tell you from my experience in Asheville that Asheville is already taking advantage of every one of these sources. And the key to looking at climate change is to say, how do we use these funding sources more specifically to support equitable housing development in our community, and equitable housing development that helps us respond adequately to the challenges that climate change will bring. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation tonight.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, friends, we will have another opportunity to answer questions, but as you may suspect, the questions are going to be a little out of order. So two things I'd like to take care of here. Eunice, I want to check if your audio is working really quick. Would you?
Hello.
Oh, super. Okay, you're back. I think that for the interest of our slides, if it's okay with Anne and Amy, we're going to go first to the trees and then circle back to Eunice. And I'm going to give the public on the line the opportunity to go ahead. We'll take a little break to go ahead and continue with some of your text answers, and understanding that the text questions are a little out of order. So we're not going to be taking the length of breaks that we had been planning to before, but just invite you to go ahead and answer those questions at your own pace. So we'll pause to do that for just a minute here, and then I will bounce back to you and to introduce Amy.
Okay.
Okay, I see some responses still coming in. I'm going to invite you to keep answering those questions at your own pace, and I'm going to turn it back to Anne to kick us off with Amy.
All right, thank you. Well, I'm going to introduce Amy Smith. She is a professor of science at Purdue University Global, where she teaches environmental science and general science. Amy has degrees in forest ecology and management, environmental policy, and freshwater ecology. She serves as the vice chair of the Urban Forestry Commission here in Asheville and also works as a real estate agent with Modern Mountain Real Estate. Amy's current research interests include urban forest policy and planning and sustainable living issues. She lives in East Asheville with her husband and 12-year-old child. Amy, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for having me. Next slide, please. Tonight, I'm going to talk about climate mitigation through tree preservation and how we are working that out in the city of Asheville. Next slide. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the benefits of urban forests. So you may not have considered that trees in our community make up a forest, and urban forests have been studied much like wild forests, and the benefits have been measured and documented in research studies. One of the primary benefits of urban forests is climate change mitigation. And as you know, trees and other vegetation soak up carbon dioxide to use for photosynthesis, locking that carbon away from the atmosphere. And large, mature trees are better at this. They capture more carbon than small or young trees. So we're going to focus a lot on preservation of existing large, mature trees. Trees also provide shade, which can reduce the impact of what is known as the urban heat island effect. I'm going to talk about that more in just a minute. Another benefit of urban forests that is very important in Asheville is stormwater mitigation. So with climate change, it is predicted that our area will receive more rain, and trees help prevent flooding by stabilizing the soil and soaking up water. So we want to keep them around as much as possible. Trees also have been associated with higher property values. So not only are tree-lined streets beautiful, but they are desired by both homeowners and tourists. And with tourism playing such a big role in our city's economy, maintaining our tree canopy is an important factor economically. Unfortunately, many cities, including Asheville, have documented differences in canopy cover by income level in different neighborhoods. Our historically redline neighborhoods have fewer trees and therefore lack the benefits that urban forests provide. The Urban Forestry Commission has identified the unequal canopy distribution and associated environmental justice issues as a top priority for action in the coming year. As we know, urban forests also provide shade, which may seem simple, but is very important. Shade improves recreational opportunities as well as reduces the energy use of buildings. And finally, urban forests reduce noise and pollution. They improve human health by decreasing air pollution. Urban forests have been documented to be correlated with reduced hospital visits, reduced obesity, reduced instances of asthma, and cleaner air overall. Next slide, please. So in the city of Asheville, we have many people and organizations that are committed to protecting and improving our trees. City government works with citizens and developers with tree protection and implements the ordinances that preserve tree canopy. The role of the Urban Forestry Commission is to advise City Council and serve as a point of contact for citizens and neighborhoods. In our city, we're also lucky enough to have residents who truly care and are engaged in environmental issues, including tree protection. So if you would like to be more involved, there's a citizen group called the Tree Protection Task Force. They meet monthly to discuss tree protection and action items such as lobbying for City Council and creating educational opportunities. If you're interested in joining that group, Asheville Greenworks website for urban forestry has information on that group and the meetings. They're also publicly advertised as part of open meetings. So many neighborhood associations and HOA groups are also involved in tree issues, as well as school and community groups. Clubs such as the Sierra Club also have a strong membership in our area. And in Asheville, we also have one of the greatest concentrations of environmental and social nonprofits in the state. As I mentioned, Asheville Greenworks is dedicated to community forestry and has staff specifically working on urban forestry and tree planting. They also maintain a nursery to run tree giveaway programs for residents. Asheville Greenworks also provides educational opportunities such as pruning and tree care seminars. Other nonprofits in our area that work with tree protection include Mountain True and Riverlink, and groups such as the Urban Forestry Commission and the Tree Protection Task Force work closely with these nonprofit groups to achieve our various tree protection goals. Next slide, please. So when it comes to urban forest management, it's important to know what you have in terms of trees in your area. So using a science-based approach and gathering data is the best way to inform policy and management decisions. Last year, the City of Asheville completed our very first tree canopy study. We contracted this through the Davie Resource Group. The study looked at canopy cover data from 2008 and 2018 and determined how canopy changed over that 10-year period. The full study is available on the Urban Forestry Commission website if you want to check it out. So on this slide, you can see a graphical representation of canopy change over that 10-year period. The red on the graph on the left here shows where canopy decreased over that time. Overall, Asheville lost an estimated 6.4% of canopy over this 10-year period, and our current canopy cover is around 44%. So 44% isn't horrible, but it's not great if we consider that historical canopy cover in our area would have been close to 100%, right? So we know there's going to be some development. The goal of the Urban Forestry Commission and Asheville Greenworks is to have canopy cover increase to 50% over the next 30 years, 50% by 2050. And the reason it takes so long is that trees grow very slow. So that is one reason why it's super important to preserve existing large trees while still planting new ones. Next slide, please. So as part of the canopy study, another piece that was included with this was a breakdown of canopy cover by census tract, so sort of by neighborhood. And on the left, you can see here the canopy loss distribution. The green is the least amount of canopy loss down to the blue being the highest level of canopy loss. And on the right, this is compared to income data. So the percentage of the population living below the poverty level, with the lighter yellow and green being a lower percentage down to the darker blues being a higher percentage. So as we can see that these overlap. So increases in canopy loss do correspond to areas with a higher percentage of people living below the poverty level. So this trend of a lack of trees in disadvantaged neighborhoods is highly concerning. And as I mentioned before, this is a high priority for the Urban Forestry Commission and Asheville Greenworks to do what we can to take action items to solve this inequity. Next slide, please. Also last year, Asheville was lucky to receive a study by a team from NASA. They have a program called NASA Develop that takes GIS data. So they're taking high-level existing data from satellites, basically, and comparing that with our recent canopy cover analysis. So here you can see land surface temperature, tree cover, and socioeconomic factors. So what NASA was looking at was this urban heat island effect. The urban heat island effect is a measurable increase in temperature of urban areas due to more built environment, such as roads and dark surfaces. And this, combined with a lack of shade, can make urban areas up to 20 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than surrounding rural and urban and suburban areas. The urban heat island effect is associated with increases in energy use and costs, also with poor health outcomes for residents, particularly the elderly and those living in poverty or without adequate housing who are susceptible to increased temperatures. The NASA Developed study looked at the temperature data on the far left, tree cover, and socioeconomic factors that included age of residents as well as income data. They put this together to create an overall heat vulnerability index that you can see on the right in the yellow and brown tones there. And once again, they noted that the most vulnerable of our population are not only in low canopy tree cover areas, but also susceptible to urban heat impacts. So we know that Asheville has a lot to do to overcome the historic and ongoing equity issues that relate to real estate and tree cover that are leaving the most vulnerable of our community at risk. And again, the data is just showing that exact same thing. Next slide, please. So in this past year, the Urban Forestry Commission has worked with city staff to develop new ordinances for tree protection. The goal was to improve incentives for preserving large, mature trees on development sites, excluding single-family homes. The new development the goal was to improve, new development projects are now required to protect existing trees, plant new trees, or pay a fee in lieu of keeping trees. The protection of existing trees is incentivized through canopy credits and overall canopy requirements. And the fees that are collected through the fee in lieu program must be used in the resource management district or the neighborhood where they are collected and are tied to installation, administration, and maintenance of the tree canopy. This ordinance was just passed in September, and the Urban Forestry Commission and city staff are continuing with ongoing process implementation for this. Next slide, please. So going forward, the Urban Forestry Commission has identified a few steps for tree protection in Asheville. First, we'd like to have a full tree inventory that identifies the species of trees and overall health of our urban canopy. We're also pushing for an urban forest master plan. This will coordinate decision-making and policy for the urban forest to coordinate with the existing Living Asheville Comprehensive Plan, but specifically for tree protection. We'd also like to see a city urban forester as a staff position. This person would be dedicated to overseeing all the urban forestry efforts in the city. Of course, tree planting is an important part of urban forest management to increase that tree canopy. We want to focus not only on public, but also private lands. And finally, we want to continue with events that involve education and community outreach. So events such as this one that we're having now help bring the community together to reach our goals and increase in education on trees. Next slide, please. Finally, I just included my email. If anybody has any questions about the trees or the Urban Forestry Commission, feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Amy. And I'm going to switch back here to have us take a look at some of the responses that have already come in with the trees questions in your text survey, and also give you the opportunity to continue to respond to some of those questions. Still seeing a few responses coming in here, and Jeffrey has already beautifully introduced Eunice, but I will turn it back to you all, Eunice and Jeffrey, as I get back to your slides here. There she is.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate the introduction. Next slide, please. My presentation this evening is going to be a quick overview of the Transit Master Plan study completed in 2018, which was also adopted by the City Council in July of 2018. I think we missed one slide. Go back to the previous one. Okay, next one. Okay. The study basically took a look at existing service and evaluated service that existed from the 2009 TMP, and basically provided recommendations to improve service in the transit network. And as a result of that, some of the recommendations that were developed included short-term service improvements and long-term vision for growth in the transit network. Part of the recommendation also looked at new routes and realigned some of the existing routes to make it shorter. It also provided recommendations for facility infrastructure and also make improvements to some of the facilities that we have in the system. The recommendation also offered a 10-year implementation and financial plans for the transit system. Next slide, please. On January 5th of this year, the city launched new service improvements, and part of that improvement entailed updating schedule to accommodate traffic congestion. It also improved frequency on routes that operated on Turner Road, Haywood Road, and the South French Broad neighborhood. We also added 3 new routes, which is the W1, W2, and W6 route. Service we provided was extended to serve New Leicester Highway. We also added new bus stops throughout the system on various routes and redesigned route and system maps for clarity. And as part of the improvements that was made, we improved connection between UNCA and AB Tech College. Next slide, please. This page here provides a summary of all the changes that we implemented on January 5th. And so, as you can see, the information is divided into the sections of the city of Asheville, North Asheville, and also South Asheville. And all the routes, numbers or names represent routes that serve those areas. And so this information here basically highlights all the different routes we have in North Asheville and South Asheville. Next slide, please. We also have a number of routes that serve East and West Asheville. We have the 170 that provides service to Hall Creek. The routes I mentioned previously, W1 and W2 were a combination of west-east routes that we already had in the system. And so again, this is a combination of current routes that we have serving East and West Asheville. Next slide, please. This slide here provides a picture of the impact of the service changes that we implemented in January of this year. The information on the left side of the slide basically shows services in terms of OTP or on-time performance before the service change. And as you can see, about 4% of our service were early, about 55% were on time, and most often, about 41% of our routes were late. And if you look at the information on the right side of the chart or the slide, as you can see, we vastly improved on-time performance based on the service changes that we implemented. about 18% of our service or routes are performing on time, and about 70% have improved on-time performance, and about 11% are late, considerable down from the 41% that we were experiencing. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a summary of the next phase of our TMP implementation. One of the things we're doing right now, as recommended in the TMP, is to look at extended service hours. And basically what that means is we're looking at analysis and also looking at information in terms of all the routes, extending the service hours to run until about 10 o'clock at night. And as part of that, we're also looking at whether or not it's feasible to implement all of it, or given all the budgetary concerns that we have, we may consider partial implementation of the extended service hours. The other thing we're also looking at is also implementing additional cross-town routes from Ingalls on Marymount Avenue to Ingalls on Hendersonville Road. And we're also looking at additional improvement on the S3 and S6 route that serves South Asheville. Next slide, please. One of the recommendations that also was provided in the TMP was to take a look at our facility, including bus stops, the transit station, and also the garage that currently house the transit operations and maintenance staff. I'm sure you all have heard about the transit station renovations that was undertaken by the Transportation Department, as well as the Capital Project Department. And so basically a quick summary of what we have done is implementation of renovations to the interior of the transit station in downtown Asheville. We also improved and enhanced the platform where most of our passengers wait for services for the bus route. Solar panels have been installed on the roof of the transit station, excuse me, as well as we've installed static signage to show information about each of the routes that serve the transit station. In addition, we've also completed installation of public Wi-Fi at the station to enable people to access their internet. What we are also waiting to do, or the next step, is to install digital signage, as well as implement public art at the transit station. And we're hoping to complete those in the next several months. Next slide, please. One of the things that the Transit Planning Division is currently working on is we're working with Capital Projects Department to undertake a study to take a look at the garage that we currently park our buses and maintain the buses. And so we have a consultant on board to help us with that study, which began in February of this year. And as part of the scope of that study, we are going to take a look at the current location on Haywood Street to see if it is feasible to expand that facility, even though it may be at capacity at this time. In addition to that, we are also going to evaluate and select other sites for a new transit garage. And so here are a few of the activities that have been completed since we began the study. Kickoff meeting with the consultants was in March of this year. We also began a space needs assessment in March of this year and completed the space needs assessment report in September of this year. And basically part of that is taking a look at the operation and maintenance staff that utilize the garage right now and to see if there's additional space needed for all the various rooms that we undertake at the garage, including facility maintenance. For instance, we have a section of the transit operations staff that work on bus stops that are located along the route. And so part of that is taking a look at how we can accommodate additional space at the facility to store all the different equipment that we are going to be acquiring throughout the service needs for the transit system. Next slide, please. Here are the next steps for the transit facility garage study. We are going to be working on a site selection evaluation criteria. And basically what that entails is staff and also the consultants are going to develop criteria to use in selecting the different sites that may be evaluated for a future transit facility location. And as part of that, the consultants are going to conduct a workshop in terms of how we go about looking at the different sites that may be evaluated and potentially selected. Part of that is, again, also looking at all the various sites that are recommended, conduct analysis, including evaluation. And as part of the last step of this, the consultants are going to provide a draft report to the city and RHCP Dev, which is the contractor that operates the transit services for the city, for review and comment. And we hope to complete the facility study in December of this year. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Eunice.
Thank you.
Thank you for graciously going last and being flexible on the fly as we deal with our technology. Speaking of technology, it's come to our attention that there's some folks are having some issues with the text survey, either stopping prematurely or not working for them. So our team is working on that, and we will transition those questions to an online survey that will be available tomorrow with questions being opened for a response through Friday. So we're hopeful that if you didn't have a chance to respond to the questions tonight, that you'll have an opportunity to check back in and be able to respond to these surveys so we can incorporate your feedback going forward. Thanks very much for all of your engagement tonight. I'm going to turn it back over to Renee.
Thank you, Kira. Thanks to all of the presenters. Thanks to the city staff for helping us put on this public input session. I'm going to give it a minute until you are done showing some of these poll results. Oh, there we go. And there's the slide. So just to kind of pull everything back together and bring us back in community, just thinking on what is your vision for a healthy, sustainable, climate resilient, and just community in Asheville. And I'm not sure if the technology will work or not, since Kira was just saying that some people are having issues with that. But I think the best way that you can add a response to this question is by texting K320 to that number 73224. And instead of asking to respond to the survey, you can submit a meeting comment. And Kira, am I correct? And is that the way that people can respond to this question?
Yes, if you get out of the text exchange and you send a new text to the same number, you'll have a different option at the beginning. Rather than responding to the text questions, you'll have the option to submit a comment. I believe it's by pushing 1.
Good. So, and this is not limited to what we were talking about tonight. I think you can add anything as we vision together as a community to make Asheville more climate resilient, sustainable, as well as just for our vulnerable communities and communities of color. And with that, I guess you can put those comments in through the text option, and I will hand it off to Amber to talk about next steps.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. And thank you to the Sustainability Advisory Committee for hosting a public input session on the city's adopted climate emergency. And I would also like to invite those of you who would like more information to participate in the office's newsletter, which is a great way to get information. And I also welcome you to check back in on the project page to learn more about this initiative. This is the first step, and I suspect we have a lot of work to do, and it will be ongoing. And working within city departments and checking in with our equity inclusion team as well to help provide guidance and utilizing our consultant. But we want to be able to provide updates to the public. So as I said, checking back in with our project page is a great way to do that. And also being a part of our newsletter. Just to circle back to Kira's comments on the questions, we will have them posted as well as email everybody that's registered. So just in case you've had some sort of inability to answer those questions, then you can get those to us. And we'll be utilizing that information to help inform us on our next steps. So with that said, I appreciate everyone joining us. Give you about 6 minutes back. And look forward to hearing more from you and reading your comments. I sent everyone an email earlier today, and you're more than welcome to send feedback back to that email. And we can also get that out to the Sustainability Advisory Committee members. And thank you to Anne, Jeffrey, and Renee for hosting us this evening.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Good night. Thank you.